As of this week, the congressional map for the 2026 midterm elections is finally set. What a whirlwind. What a year it's been. 10 states drew new maps mid-cycle for 2026. Some of these maps disrupted ongoing elections, some caused chaos, and most diminished the voting power of Black voters in the South. We are not better off because of this mid-cycle redistricting crisis. We saw states bend the knee to Trump, complying with his orders to manipulate districts to insulate himself in Congress from any accountability. We saw Republicans rush to disenfranchise voters, particularly voters of color. This is no way to govern. We have to get our democracy back on the right track. And that might mean trying new things, throwing out old playbooks. But if we want any chance of getting our country back, we have to keep up the work. Let's get into it. I'm Marina Jenkins.
I'm John Bisignano, and this is Drawing the Line.
Whew, John, it is almost a year. We were just having this conversation.
It's an easy year. Nice light year.
It's been almost, we're at like 11 and a half months as of recording. How do you feel? How you feeling?
Good. Democracy's great. Democracy's thriving. Really, really great. Oh, I know. It's hard to believe it's been a year since, Trump stood in front of Marine One and said that he was going to simply do a simple redraw and take 5 seats from Texas, which really kicked off this chaos. But it has. And like you said, we've lived through 10 state redraws and actually another handful of states that didn't end up redrawing, but took just as much work. Places like South Carolina and Indiana that, took a great deal of effort from folks on the ground to push back against their Republican legislators trying to redraw their maps. So I'd say, a good third of the country probably had some kind of massive impact, if not more than that, just trying to get to trying to keep things at some level of stasis while Trump was manic and panicked that he was going to lose the midterms and saw this as their only tool to break it down.
Yeah. And, I think it is safe to say, unfortunately, that this is not the end. Now that we've sort of hit, hopefully, what feels like the end of redraws for the 2026 map and the end of the gerrymandering crisis as pertains to what the maps will look like for these midterm elections. We'll talk in a minute about how this keeps going and we have to turn and focus on 2028 almost immediately. Certainly we're going to see Trump try a number of other intimidation tactics, disinformation tactics, all sorts of things to try to suppress the vote heading into November. But, I think where we are in this moment, we have been able to push back so that, they didn't get what they thought they were going to get, what Trump, as he said, standing on the White House lawn, said he was entitled to all these additional seats. That's not how democracy works, but, no one told him that. But,
wait, quick aside, Trump in that, just to level set, at the beginning of this chaos, it is noteworthy that the quote that Trump was using was, if he stops vote by mail and gerrymanders as much as possible, the Republicans will win 100 more seats, which is crazy. But then you even have other folks like Steve Bannon that were out there saying, I think it was 20 that he was quoting, that they were going to take from Democrats just through redistricting alone. So I do think our fight was critical in trying to keep this number down as small as possible
100%.
and keep the playing field for the U.S. House of Representatives in play.
You know what? Someone should also suggest to Trump that, if you only let Republicans vote, Republicans will always win. It seems to be kind of what he's going for.
He's into that. Yeah, I don't think that sounds like it would be a pretty good path for him.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Whoever gives him that idea gets to be the next attorney general. How about that?
God.
Okay. So we are at this inflection point and it's important to acknowledge. And, there are still a lot of things moving and sort of the piece that wrapped us up that got us to this moment where we can, somewhat definitively say Although now every time I say something definitively, I feel like,
Yeah, what does that mean?
the universe is like,
Definitively.
yeah, right. They would never do that. The number of times I said that about the Supreme Court this year. Um, uh, but in Florida, we just did get they would never do that decision out of the Florida Supreme Court, which basically has allowed the sort of under the veil of a long and drawn out court process, Florida Supreme Court is deferring its own review of the case that National Redistricting Foundation and others brought in Florida, challenging the new Florida map as a partisan gerrymander. Again, remember, folks, the Florida Constitution says very specifically, very simply, you may not partisan gerrymander. You may not draw a map that biases incumbents or political parties. That's exactly what happened. And the Florida courts are just like, no, 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 no. Those words don't mean their plain English language meaning. They just mean something mysterious over there that, we can't talk about.
Well, I do think it's noteworthy that the case will go on, and it's not that the court decided the case in this instance. They they will eventually, but what they basically said was they weren't going to take it at the speed with which they would have needed to get a result for 2026, which is maddening on its face, right? This is such a blatant constitutional violation, but here we are. They said, oh no, we need to take our time. And, this is the problem we're seeing in state Supreme Courts across the country. You have a place like Florida where the court Republican packed, right? This is like a DeSantis. I think literally everyone now is DeSantis chosen at this point. I think he's selected the full court, if not very close to the full court. But you have a court in Florida that basically is saying, I know the voters said 10 years ago or 12 years ago that they didn't want partisan gerrymandering, but we're going to take our time and we're not sure how we're going to, come out, what kind of conclusion we're going to come out with. And then in Virginia, you have the voters told us literally days ago that they want this new map in place. And we feel like through a nuance and some kind of ideological bent, we're going to dismiss this whole thing, an election that already came to play. So it's so deeply clear that when these judges become partisan actors in their own right, they are very comfortable dismissing the will of the voters. Same goes for Alabama, or same goes for Louisiana, where basically what happened was the judges said, we need you to put in place a new map. This is an emergency that they were discriminated, that black voters for the first time in their history had their power. And that was an emergency that the judge decided they were going to go and throw out 15,000 votes.
So as the Florida decision, and good note, the Florida Supreme Court did not rule on the merits of the challenge to the new map, but they have allowed it to move much more slowly than what we were hoping for. And we were hoping for them to, rule on the very obvious question of, is what the Florida legislature did partisan gerrymandering? The answer was yes, but that is apparently beside
Ron DeSantis said so. He said we partisan gerrymandered, but that's okay. We're allowed.
Right. That's literally what the legislator said, in the legislative process, on the floor of the Florida legislature. That is what they said. They were just yeah, we're doing this because we don't think that we have to follow the fair district amendments. So cool. But all right. So this marks a very important inflection point, which is to say the 2026 map is set. But lo and behold, we are days from the first big battle over the 2028 map, because Georgia is beginning a special session on June 17th to redraw its congressional and possibly also state legislative maps. And, Governor Kemp seems to be doing this now instead of waiting until next year, because probably he thinks that there will not be a Republican governor next year.
It's really the only reason. The only reason you could possibly go now. Why would you want to go? redraw your maps now in the middle of an election cycle, take on all this political baggage, have people angry. Like, why? Oh, one
Yeah.
obvious reason. You don't think you'll be able to do it later.
And he's out of office, right? This is his lame duck year. And so, he wants the extra special brownie points for, being part of the gerrymandering club.
The cool club.
Yeah, all those cool kids who love to take voting power away from Black voters in the South. It's like the place to be these days. So Georgia's special session. So I think at first we had thought that this was just going to be about the congressional map in Georgia. Now, Georgia obviously is home to an incredibly sprawling metropolitan area that is in, the Atlanta metropolitan area, but also has a fair amount of Democratic and Black representation in the southwest corner of the state. And so, and across the Black Belt, there are, it's a diverse and large state. But what they're going to try and do is basically draw as few districts around Atlanta as possible. And then the question is whether they sort of permit representation for folks anywhere else across the state who do not, for folks who do not support the Republicans and Donald Trump. And it'll be really interesting to see, we've sort of heard anywhere from 2 to 3 seats that they're going to try and take. I think that's aggressive for them. But, that's where sort of the rumor mill is swirling.
Yeah, I think that's agree. And it really is all progressive, left-leaning, left-of-center voters that get damaged by these. I'm not trying to minimize the concrete damage that's being done to Black representation in the South, Latino representation across the Southwest specifically. But anyone that lives in a city has a progressive bent, even if you live in a rural community and want broader, your voice to be heard in a more genuine and concrete way. You want your vote to matter. I think that's really what gets damaged when they pick up the pen and draw these lines in any of these states. You look at what's happening in Tennessee and Memphis. And I know we've said it 20 times, but places like Memphis, as a city, for the first time in history is not going to have a representative in Washington that really cares about Memphis. It'll have 3 people that have a sliver of Memphis in their district, as opposed to really trying to ensure that city has representation. So they're minimizing Black voters, Latino voters, and left-leaning white voters that are in cities and broader communities across the country every day.
It's just really shameful, it's very craven, just really, I don't know. I sometimes lose words to describe just how cynical it is. It's like they've just given up on convincing people that they have ideas and policies that can work for the American public, and instead of just decided
they don't. I mean, I think that's the problem. It's not that they can't convince people. It's that they don't have the ideas or the policies.
True.
And, that's what we're seeing right now. I think as people grow more optimistic that the House is going to turn Democratic this coming election cycle, which it's going to take work, and no one should take it for granted that it's going to turn Dem. But I think that as we're seeing that, and we're seeing gas prices spike, I genuinely believe we're seeing a run on money in this country, right? Like corporations are just sucking out every dollar they can and raising prices everywhere because they know that there's about to be more oversight when Democrats get put into office. They know that people are going to start to care. There's going to be a blowback. So now we're in this moment in time between now and an election where everybody is just going to scream for as much as they possibly can. And we're going to see the American people get more and more disenchanted with the idea that Donald Trump has any economic idea that's going to better this place while just letting it completely flail. And I mean, look, now is a good reflection point to take a minute and think all of this. We've been through a year, like you said, of hell, of trying to salvage and redraw maps and fight back in every place we can.
Yeah.
And what did they get? And I think in the end, they probably got 5 to 6 seats, net seats. for all of this. They're
Yeah.
gonna they've and you know, we don't even know that. We don't know what they're gonna have. I do think that black voters across the South are super angry and are going to start registering to vote at different levels than they've ever seen before. The voters are going to turn on them in ways that they're not expecting and did not expect when they drew these maps. We'll see what the final number is at the end of the day, you know, when the report card comes out after election day. But the truth is they've done as much damage as they can do. They probably netted, let's say, somewhere between 4 and 6 seats. I don't think they're going to hold the House with that margin. And, you know, realistically, they've showed every card they had. They've used every cruel tool in the book to try and skew this election. And I'm sure there'll be more that we'll see as we get closer to election day. But I can't imagine. I would hope a lot of Republicans are looking around and understanding it wasn't worth it, because this is an insane amount of money spent, effort, villainization of their own people and Democrats, and just drawing as many divisions as possible to try and steal 5 seats in a congressional election cycle where you're going to see a major swing.
All of these expectations that they have. Well, first of all, you know, if you go back in time and you start in Texas, and when Trump stood on the White House lawn and talked about how he was entitled to 5 seats, and when they drew that Texas map, they drew it with the assumption that the political results of the 2024 election was their floor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, the other story
sure.
here over the past year is also just like, to your point about like they started from this, you know, Steve Bannon saying we're going to get 20 seats out of this redistricting, and they start drawing those seats, and then as they are, you know, executing this, you know, gerrymandering crisis across the country, they go from Texas to Missouri to North Carolina, move to Florida, Calais comes down, the states across the South are moving and redrawing their maps to dismantle those seats. And as all of that is happening, we're seeing special election after special election where Democrats are overperforming in unexpected places, including in Iowa, including it at, you know, in the district where Mar-a-Lago sits, right? Like in all of these places where suddenly that rosy picture that they thought that they were, you know, that was their basement, actually is probably their ceiling, at least for the short term. And, you know, the reality of what we're going to see, I think, between now and then is that them coming to that realization. This gambit didn't, you know, win them the House, which is what they wanted to do. They wanted to not have to try. They wanted to not have to like talk to or appeal to American voters. And they wanted to, you know, make sure that they had control of Congress, because Congress has just been the lapdog of Donald Trump for the past year, right? And they just want that to continue. They don't want a body of government at the federal level that, you know, pushes back in any way, let alone accountability to the American people. And so, it's like this feeling, you know, I use the word inflection point because I do feel like it's this moment where, okay, we're sort of, we've lived this really challenging year and gone through all of these fights. The fights are still ongoing. We're going to talk a little bit about 2028 in a moment, more about it. Georgia's going to be part of that too. But, you know, we're also now seeing stories about like the FBI raiding voter registration groups in Ohio, right? Like the tactics on their side are just going to shift. And so, you know, it's like there's like a little bit of like a sense of relief that we finally have a set map and we can focus on winning elections in the fall and making sure that people are getting out, and that we are showing that despite this effort that we're going to keep fighting for our democracy. And the fact that they didn't get what they wanted and they didn't assure themselves the House, you know, in the fall, just doesn't mean they're going to stop trying. And in fact, I think it means we're going to see uglier and uglier tactics as the year moves and we move closer and closer to November.
Yep, I think that's right. I mean, you are correct that the ideas are not forthcoming. The ideas themselves are not leading the way. We've been saying that for 12 months now, where like they're spending money flying around the country trying to convince legislators to come to DC and redraw their maps, like in Indiana. And it's like, why don't you be spending that money trying to get us out of a war or drive down tax prices instead of begging people to cheat the maps, and they never really had a plan for
Right.
that.
And like
Um,
not only the like current ongoing stuff that's so bad, like, you know, the war, gas prices, grocery prices, right? Like all of this, but then the like full year out like reality of all of these stupid cuts that they made with Doge, like that they cut the program that was um trying to kill the like flesh eating worms. Have you been following this story? And so now there's like, but it's like a real agricultural problem that they have these like flesh eating worms that are attacking cattle. And it's just like how stupid they are. And all of that is coming to a head and is going, you know, people are starting to actually really, really feel both the impacts of all of the stupid cuts that they made a year ago and the bad decisions they're making on a day-to-day basis today. And all of that is just a shitstorm for them, as it should be, because they are just the worst. Anyway.
no notes.
Okay, I keep saying we're going to talk a little bit more about 2028, and I want to do that. So we talked about Georgia. Georgia's drawing maps, congressional and probably state ledge. It's not entirely clear. Kemp has added a couple things. They're going to start June 17th. And our expectation from what we hear in state is that they are going to try to be wrapped in time for all of the legislators to get back to their July 4th festivities on time.
God forbid.
So, you know, it's a God forbid your stealing elections interrupts your parade walking. I don't know.
Yeah, imagine these poor folks.
So we do expect it to move relatively quickly, you know, a week or 10 days to move through both the redistricting and, you know, as noted, Kemp has added a couple other topics. But so, you know, so it's sort of hard to tell at this point exactly how the map or maps will move, but we'll keep folks updated. You got to follow along with our content. We'll have lots of ways for people to get engaged at Dem Redistrict and at Redistricting Action. So follow, and sign up, go to our websites, do all the things. But in addition to Georgia, we're also going to be looking this year to movement in, well, we already saw New York pass the first step of a multi-step process to get a ballot initiative going, to get a referendum and constitutional amendment before the voters in New York, to allow New York's voters to choose to have the ability to fight back in this battle. And we're going to have the same thing moving in Colorado. So hopefully we'll see in Colorado this fall an amendment, a constitutional amendment that will similarly allow Colorado voters to decide that they want to participate in the pushback against these gerrymandering efforts.
Yeah, and we're going to need it because I do think what they've shown us so far this year and what we totally anticipate them doing is just continuing this bludgeon across the South and any other state that they can possibly pick up the pen and redraw the maps in. And so as we anticipate that, we are going to need a lot of Democratic states to be prepared, if called upon, to redraw their maps and skew back what Republicans are taking in places like Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas.
So that's all coming, and it's so important. And so you know, apart from you know establishing these referendums, you know, ballot initiative campaigns, which we will be engaging with and talking to folks about and keeping folks informed about. It's also, you know, we are as an organization are focused on a fair and representative democracy at the federal level. You know, obviously we talk a lot about what's happening with the congressional maps, but the way to do that is largely through the states. And so our investments that we make in, you know, in the political realm are in state level offices so that those people can make better choices about maps, you know, that we can be in a position to have power and to stop the worst things from happening. And so it's also important for folks to engage in those elections ahead of November. We are targeting races across 14 states that will help us to do a number of things. It'll help us counter or overturn Republican mid-decade gerrymanders. It'll help us eliminate the threat of new further mid-decade gerrymanders, because as we noted, like, we're turning into 2028 because we know that, the Republicans are not stopping. Georgia is not stopping. Mississippi has already said that they want to redraw in 2027. And we expect Indiana maybe to try and go back and try again. And lots of other states where there's sort of rumors swirling, and we need to be ready. So we need to be ready to eliminate that threat. And part of the ability for us to do that is an electoral strategy. And we need to achieve and protect fair-minded state Supreme Court majorities. This is something that we have long invested in since the organization was founded, especially seeing what the federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court have done in terms of abdicating their responsibility to protect voters' rights. Oftentimes, state courts are the place to have your rights vindicated. And so, protecting those courts and achieving, pro-democracy majorities on those courts is incredibly important. And then, we need to help pro-democracy candidates across state legislatures and other state offices that are key in positions that are key to redistricting, right? So that we can get our democracy back on the right track by having the right people in the right places to make sure that we have a representative democracy. We need to put Democrats in a good position for redistricting in 2028 and 2030, and then we're going to have... We're going to
2030.
Then we're going to be back at the decennial, which is insane. But which is going to be it's a whole other conversation, which we'll get into very soon because it is coming. So we believe that we can take back the House, as we've noted. It's just going to require consistent work over the next few years, and that starts in November. And it starts probably in October, and even before that. For us, it started yesterday.
Starts today, right?
Yeah. All right. Anything else on the? Oh my God. Sorry. I know I just ran through that, folks. We've got all of that information is available on our website, democraticredistricting.com. So if you want to dig in, if you want to see if we are going to be working on elections in your state, if you want to figure out how to volunteer, get engaged, mobilize with our folks, please go to redistrictingaction.com. redistrictingaction.org, and follow us. Stay with us. Stay in this conversation with us. Come back, and we will have more for you soon. We are at Dem Redistrict on all the things, and we'll be here. We'll be back with you soon for more.
This show is produced by Reed Dudley, Sophia Pedroso, and Manuel Marce. Special thanks to Alex Yang. Editing and mixing by Play Pretend Media. This podcast is paid for by the National Democratic Redistricting Committee.